Hey John, how you doing?
Doing good, Tyler. How are you today?
Oh man, just dandy. Just peachy today.
It's that kind of day. It's a peachy day.
Yeah. Every day is a peachy day.
Every day is a peachy day on this podcast.
That's right. I'm especially happy. I wore my Aggie hat today. I just noticed we probably lost about half of our viewership. Well, I don't know what's half of zero. Apparently, BYU fans are, maybe I'll say they're typically following the church. And so when they saw my Utah State hat, they must have gone running.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Anyway.
But what did we get today? Like a 10th seed against Missouri? Is that what I saw?
Better than I thought we were going to get. So, yeah. I'll hold off on any reservation I'll reserve my prediction of who's going to win until it can not be on the record.
It said Missouri. I thought, oh man, maybe today would have been a good day to talk about Mormons in Missouri and like the Missouri War and all that.
But there's a lot to talk about. We'll get there. Patience.
Yeah, next time.
For now, though, we've got a nice continuation. I thought we had a great discussion last week talking about kind of the culture of magic surrounding Joseph Smith and kind of his involvement. I'm excited to jump into getting more around not so much Joseph Smith and what he did, but maybe just holistically what was the culture across the area. So I'm excited for this.
Yeah, last week was a lot of fun. This is just a fun topic. I had a few people reach out during the week who they had heard about Joseph Smith and treasure digging, but they hadn't heard about it until later on, until they were older. You know, some of them after they had served a mission, some of them read about it in books that you don't necessarily read in church. It's not part of the church curriculum, that sort of thing. So yeah, it is a fun topic and something new that people can something new and fun that people can learn about.
Yeah. I had someone reach out. She said that her great grandma used a divining rod. At least that's what her family oral tradition.
Oh, cool!
Says, so it was kind of fun to link that to church history.
Yeah. There's lots of fun stories. I had a professor, and I don't know if we want to get into it, but I had a professor who actually used divining rods once. No training or anything.
Did it work?
Yeah,
nice.
It was. No, it was back east. So the story is, we should get him on the podcast actually. But the story is, he was, I think, in Tennessee, doing some research, and he had a host who was taking him around. I think. Anyway, she knew the area, and he asked her about sort of the folklore of the area, and she took him out to this empty field in the middle of nowhere. And they parked car. They got out of the car, and she had this wire hanger that had been cut into pieces. So there were two pieces, and she said, "Take these, hold them parallel." Sorry, I bumped the mic. Hold them parallel, and just walk straight out into the field. So he did it. He's walking straight out into the field, and then without really doing anything, the two pieces went like this. They crossed, and he's like, "Oh, that's eerie. What does that mean?" She said, "You're standing above a slave grave." So a bunch of slaves, African American slaves, had been buried right in that spot.
We do need to have this guy on the podcast.
Yeah, we do.
It might be a little bit of tangent from church history, but anyone
he covers church history. He'd be good.
Awesome. I'm more interested in divining rods. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, great. I'm hooked. Sign me up. I'll be there.
Yeah, good stuff. It's like I said, I think it's a fun topic. Historically, I think the LDS Church has kind of shied away from this topic for whatever reason. We'll get into that a little bit, but it just wasn't talked about. It wasn't. I think there was a mix of just not wanting to address it, but also just not knowing enough about it to really engage the topic. But I think that's changing. We're getting more information. The church has addressed it a little bit more, and people are a little bit more open-minded about it. So it not only is the topic fascinating, but the discussion around it is pretty interesting too.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. So, as our faithful listeners know, all three of them, we like to focus on a specific document or source for every chapter that we do. And for this chapter, which is, magic, divination, treasure seeking, we're focusing on a court case that involved Joseph Smith in Shenandoah County, New York, in 1826. And we'll just review this real quick. But in 1825, a wealthy farmer named Josiah Stowell hired Joseph Smith to help him seek out buried treasure that he thought was on his farm. He believed that there was an old Spanish mine on his farm, and he wanted to dig it up, wanted to find it. He couldn't find it, and he heard rumors of this young man who knew how to do that, who had a gift of divination. So he seeks out Joseph Smith, who's in Palmyra, finds him, brings him to his farm. He's impressed with Joseph's abilities, and he was impressed because Joseph was able to tell Josiah very detailed about his own farm. And so he brings Joseph back to his own farm, along with Joseph Smith Sr. and a few others, and they start looking for this mine. And from there, it gets a little hazy. There are some stories that say Joseph, as they got closer to the mine, his visions became more blurred. And the reason for that was because as they were getting closer, there were spirits guarding this mine, and so they were blocking Joseph's abilities to see it. Which again, that would not have been unusual back then. There was a strong belief in protecting spirits that would have kept the living from discovering treasures. So that would not have been that unusual, but that's just one story. Others are that Joseph was hired, and once he got there, he kind of realized that there was nothing there. It was kind of a lost cause, and he slowly began to convince Josiah that this was a lost cause. Anyway, so there's lots of stories around it, but in this court case, Joseph was charged and brought to court, and I believe he was brought to court by Josiah's nephew. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. Anyway, yeah, they thought that Josiah had been duped by Joseph, so they brought him to court under charges of being a disorderly person.
Are you talking about Peter Bridgman?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see.
Stowell's nephew, Peter Bridgman, complained that Joseph had duped his uncle. There you go.
Yep.
I should be the professor.
Yeah, you should.
Just give me the notes every week.
I'll do the work and you can do the talking. Yeah, so he brings Joseph. He charges against Joseph. Joseph is arrested and brought to court. And So yeah, that's where we're at. Joseph is arrested on charges of being disorderly while he was still living with Stoll. The disorderly person statute is kind of hazy. It involved a lot of different things. There were 10 different categories of being a disorderly person, um, which included people who were pretending to be able to, quote, discover where lost goods may be found. And that's the provision under which Joseph was prosecuted. And so we don't have a lot of information about it. For example, let's see, the original docket or the original record that was kept by the judge is lost. So we don't have that. We have to kind of reconstitute the facts around other sources. But we do know that Joseph was brought to trial, that he was charged and as being a disorderly person. So then the question becomes, we know that this sort of thing, these sort of beliefs were pretty common around the New England area. And so today I'd like to talk about where that belief comes from, sort of the history of it, and why people believed the way they did.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's see. Pull up my notes here. So a lot of this tradition, this magic tradition, comes from all the way back in the Bible. For example, in Genesis 44, chapter 44, verse 2 and 5, and we may have talked about this last week a little bit, but we hear about Joseph the prophet, of the one that had the colorful coat. You know, he sets up his little brother Benjamin to be arrested to test his other brothers. And the way he tests him is he puts a cup in Benjamin's bag. And the scripture refers to that cup being one that Joseph used for divination. And Tyler, do you know anything about divination?
No, actually, I just had a thought as we were doing this today. The connection of divine with divination, is that linked from the same root?
Yeah, I think so. It's so divine, divination. The root there, of course, is divine. Just refers to supernatural, right?
Okay.
Divination is a way of seeking knowledge or knowledge of the future through supernatural means. And so we know from the scripture that Joseph who had the colorful coat, he used some sort of means to gather supernatural knowledge. And that may not be too much of a surprise because Joseph's whole thing was interpreting dreams, right? So he may have traditionally, I'm speaking from a traditional standpoint now, he may have used different things to do that, different objects and different keywords, that sort of thing. So we have that tradition. And then there's a lot more from the Bible. We know that Hebrews anciently would choose priests and temple workers from casting lots. Now, casting lots is a term that's thrown around a lot. Usually the idea is that it's like drawing straws, right? Whoever gets the short straw loses or wins, depending on what outcome you're looking for. But anciently, it actually had a lot more context in that. It wasn't just chosen at random. It was a way for the divine or the supernatural to manifest their will. So let's say you're drawing straws, someone gets the short straw, they lose. That's not just, oh, okay, everything's fair. We objectively chose someone to lose. For them, anciently, it was more like, okay, the divine has manifested their will by having this person choose the short straw. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Just it's not random. It's their way of asking God who deserves the short straw. Let's put them out there and find out who picks it.
Exactly. Yeah, and interestingly enough, there's a way of doing this with the Bible, or there was in early America. What they would do, and we actually hear this sometimes in LDS traditions as well. People just opening the scriptures and finding a specific verse that gives them some kind of meaning or communicates some kind of special message, right? I'm sure you've heard of that, Tyler, like stories of people just opening their scriptures and finding a verse that speaks to them in some way.
Yeah, that was the way to pass the time back when my teenage years.
Yeah. So so there's a tradition. There was one source that said that's what Joseph Smith did when he read James 1:5. It wasn't that he was just going through the Bible, reading it like a book. He just opened it one day and that verse popped out to him. And that was sort of like the equivalent of casting lots, right? There was a divine communication there that the supernatural God wanted Joseph to read that verse. That was his will for Joseph, to read that verse and go out and seek wisdom through prayer. So there's that. There's a tradition of that in the Bible, and we hear about that when the 11 remaining apostles chose the replacement for Judas after Jesus's crucifixion. There's also a tradition of sort of these magical objects that could heal people. For example, Moses's brass serpent was a big one, and that's pretty well known in LDS tradition. The story of that, of course, is that as the Israelites were making their exodus to Canaan, they're bitten by these fiery serpents, right? Everyone's getting poisoned by these snakes. So what Moses does is he creates a brass serpent and sticks it on a rod, and anyone who looks on that serpent is healed. So there's a tradition of that. There's also in Acts chapter 19, verses 11 through 12, there's an example of Paul doing something similar. It says, "And God wrought special miracles by the hands of Paul, so that from his body were brought unto the sick handkerchiefs or aprons, and the diseases departed from them, and the evil spirits went out of them." And there's an old LDS scholar named Michael Quinn who says that some of the more Orthodox Christians justified Paul's use of these magical objects by explaining that the people he was teaching believed in magic, so he used the strategy of enchanting these handkerchiefs to convince them of the truthfulness of his message. So that was sort of their way of justifying it. But the fact remains, Paul was using an object that had some sort of supernatural ability and used it to help people and heal people, do something miraculous with it.
So basically, what these have in common is there's some sort of method that's understood by the people to be magical rituals or sources or magical maybe objects, and the people are using those magical methods to do miracles. Again, distinction between magic, miracles, and that kind of spectrum in between. But more miracles come from God. Magic, not so much. This is saying they're using magical things to do godly miracles.
Right, exactly. And we'll get more into that a little bit. But yeah, you touch on a good point, which we've talked about a little bit, which is that the difference between magic and God's divine power, right? What is the difference? Well, it depends on who you ask. It depends on what's accomplished, you know. Again, I'll go back to the example of Moses in Pharaoh's court when he lays down his rod and it turns into a giant snake, and then Pharaoh's priests come out. I think they lay down their rods and snakes, those turn into snakes as well. So for the Hebrews, Moses is using God's power, right? But Pharaoh's priests are using something else like black magic, So it's kind of interesting the dichotomy there, the difference between the two, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, you're right in that there's a thousands of years old tradition that objects can be used to perform supernatural actions. And the traditions keep going, right? There's a Jewish tradition that Solomon knew magic, that his wisdom, when God grants him wisdom, it's not just being able to reason through things, it's the ability to have visions and perform supernatural acts. There's also Jacob the patriarch in Genesis 30, verses 37 through 39. Jacob takes these rods of green poplar and of hazel and chestnut trees, and he puts these like lines in them, and he puts these rods next to these watering troughs. And when these flocks come to drink, the sheep, after they drink from these troughs that have been enchanted by these rods, the flocks, their babies, the lambs, come out spotted, so they're not perfect. So in a way, Jacob curses or some way influences these flocks with these rods, these magical rods. And yeah, we talked about Paul and his handkerchiefs, and then there's an ancient Greek philosopher named Celsus who talked about Jesus a lot. This was a little while after Jesus's life. This guy, he heard these stories, and he didn't just dismiss them. He didn't dismiss Jesus or the stories about Jesus as false. He said, no, it's very possible that Jesus was some kind of magician. In fact, he probably learned his magic while he was a child in Egypt. As we all know, Egypt, even back then, had a tradition of being a very supernatural place, right, with the mummies and the divine characters that they believed in. So this guy, a Greek philosopher, believed that Jesus was a magician, and that he was able to learn about this kind of stuff while he was in Egypt. Cool. Does that all make sense?
And so, Greek philosopher, I am assuming he's not Christian. Celsus, no. He's just aware of the Christian philosophies, yeah, and then this Christian stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, you're saying this goes on throughout recorded history, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we go into the medieval period, right? Around the year 1000, medieval Europe, that belief continues. You have a lot more of, but now it's beginning to be mingled in with Christianity, right? Which makes sense too, because you read in the New Testament, Jesus is performing miracles. So in a way, magic is a part of Christianity. It becomes very inherent in Christian traditions.
John, do you have any idea? Do you have any idea if there's a presence of these magic rituals across all major world religions, or most of them, or anything like that? Or is this more specific towards Western cultures? Or, I mean, obviously we've established before Christianity, but this kind of line of religious understanding.
Yeah, a great question. I think there is in some form or another. I'm not as versed on Far Eastern religions and traditions, but I think there definitely is. And you look at the terracotta warriors, right, in ancient China, they were put there because of the belief that the emperor who was buried with them would need an army in the afterlife. So there's some supernaturalness there. There's sort of a magic essence to those soldiers.
For those of you just listening on podcast, I just wanted to point out the blank stare I got when you said terracotta soldiers. I have no idea who they are, but I'll take your word for it that they needed armies in the afterlife.
Oh, the terracotta soldiers.
Are those If they're on Mulan, then I might remember them.
Okay, let me pull up a picture. This will be
fun. I don't, not for my sake, not for my sake. I don't want to get too far off.
No, this is fine. This will be good. Okay, how do I pull up a picture onto our...
share your screen and then I'll throw it up there.
Okay, hold on. Share my screen. Settings? No. Present.
You have photographs of these terracotta warriors?
Yeah, I just pulled them up. Okay, here we go. Good old Google. Are you seeing it?
I see something.
I see.
Are they made out of stone or sand?
Yeah, they're made out of stone. Do you see them right here?
Those are these guys. That's impressive.
Yeah, these guys are like, and you can see this is where they were dug up. This is a burial, a grave of one of the emperors. Oh, Emperor Keen.
All right, I should have known who these people. I should have known who these soldiers are. This one's completely on me. You've convinced me.
But look at the detail, though. They're pretty fascinating and they're priceless objects, right? But this is where they were buried. And of course, the supernatural element is that Emperor Keen or Kin, I'm sorry, I don't know Far Eastern stuff, but he would have needed these soldiers in the afterlife for protection. So
imagine how angry the energy industry was when they found out they couldn't build a pipeline through this land.
Oh, yeah, there's Tyler putting his energy hat on.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, these guys are
we
fantastic.
all use and need electricity. We're not a political podcast here. I am pro people wisely using electricity that they need to, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to make sure we do that as responsibly as possible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you need to be employed, right, Tyler?
That too.
See, this was in the news. I remember this. Somebody ripped off this guy's thumb.
Oh, I took it off already.
Yeah, oh, okay. Sorry. Anyway. Yeah, they're like, I want to say they're like 10 feet tall. They're really impressive. So anyway.
Travel list.
Yeah, check it out. So there's the terracotta warriors. That's just one example, obviously. But the Hindu religion, Hindu tradition, same thing. You have many divine characters. Buddhism, same thing. The whole idea there is that you can be, what's the word? Not resurrected, but
reincarnated.
Come back and reincarnated. Thank you. You come back as another being, and you work your way up to nirvana. So yeah, I think every religion, and there's a lot of philosophies around this, that and philosophical ideas, that religion is based off of supernatural ideas. And the idea of it all is religion starts out, this is philosophically and historically the idea, that religion starts out as a way of explaining the unexplained. And that's sort of the definition of supernatural, right? It's being able to give a reason for something that you can't explain. So if we take ancient Greece, for example, you have Zeus, king of the gods. He is the one responsible for lightning, right? Poseidon was the god of the ocean. So anytime something went well, or something went bad, you have to have a reason to explain that. And the reason is that someone somewhere is controlling these elements, and either they're happy or they're upset about it. And we see that humanization of the divine even in the Old Testament. God gets angry a lot in the Old Testament, and he causes earthquakes, he causes pestilences, diseases, droughts, all these kinds of things. And the idea behind that all, again, is that people living through these events had no way of explaining it other than there's some power somewhere, and it must be a person, because that's the best way that they can imagine it, that is controlling all these elements. So
Right.
yeah, going back to your question, there's definitely some history there. I would argue across all religious traditions.
I I can always tell how far away I am from a big city when I go to the church and hear how frequently they pray for rain. If they do it continuously, you know that there's not a city within 500 miles. If they never mention it, then you're just downtown.
Yeah, you're just downtown. Oh, I must be dead. Must be downtown. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. We still see it today. The last few years here in Utah, people have been praying for rain. The governor issued a request last year for all of Utahns of whatever religious tradition to pray for rain. So that's actually something I want to talk about further on down, because there is a sort of a basis for that tradition.
Well, that's your contribution to the field of history, right? Wasn't that your dissertation? Is kind of the Mormon impact on the environment in Utah?
Yeah, hopefully we get to it one day. But yeah,
Well,
that's
we'll get
exactly
there. We'll get there. But we have to
so.
stop doing. I need to stop going off my pointless tangents if we ever want to make it in my lifetime. You were saying
Oh,
medieval magic. Maybe
yeah,
that's a good segue to get us back onto medieval magic.
yeah. I think people enjoy our tangents, but yes. So medieval magic, and there's a lot of traditions there. Everyone's heard of fairies, sprites, that sort of thing. Um, Fantasy is based off of these. The fantasy genre is based off of these traditions.
Did you say
But
sprites?
yeah, sprites, not the drink, Tyler.
That's the only
Not
sprite
that
I know.
lemony, not that lemony lime beverage that you like with the
What's
bubbles.
this? What's a
Not that
sprite?
one. All right, let me go back to Google.
I
A
don't know.
sprite is
Okay.
just, it's like a fairy.
Okay. Good enough. I'll Google it I'll Google it my own time. I don't.
Yeah, our listeners can do
They all
that
know what it is
research on
already.
their own.
This is just for me. Our Googlers are intelligent beings. I'm the one just trying to catch up here.
They are intelligent. Yeah, that's why they listen to us. So yeah, but then in medieval times, you get the sense of uh, these magic traditions being ingrained into Christianity. And again, it goes back to how you define magic, but you start seeing things like holy water. Um, I'm sure we've all seen images of priests during these medieval times sprinkling holy water on people to bless them. The idea of using a cross as a talisman, people carrying crosses around their necks as a form of protection against evil spirits and evil influences. Um, you also have people worshiping the bones of dead or dead, and worshiping might not be the correct word, but praying to the saints through by kneeling it down at their bones or at their grave. And we still see elements of that today. People going to grave sites, memorials, and communicating or talking to the people who are buried there. But back then, during this medieval period, you had people actually praying to the saints by kneeling at their bones and invoking their names to try to bring about some sort of supernatural action, maybe a healing, even a resurrection at times. You also start to see really strongly this idea of alchemy. Have you ever heard of alchemy, Tyler?
Yeah, if you play the Settlers expansion pack, you can set the dice to any number you want. I believe you need the alchemy card to do that.
Oh yeah, I don't have an alchemy card in my expansion, but yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Maybe it's Knights and Cities. I don't know. Something Settlers esque.
Yeah. So alchemy is, of course, turning metal into gold. And this starts to really gain steam during the medieval period. Uh, Gold, of course, very precious metal, one of the most valuable things in the world at the time. And
is this using chemistry or just using magic entirely?
yeah, so it would have been at this time it's magic. During the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, that sort of thing, magic turns into science basically, and we'll get
Okay.
into that. But
So they're actually
but
taking some metallic thing and making it look golden.
they're trying to. Yeah, there's this
Okay.
idea that you could do that through these magical means, and
Cool.
I think it's, and maybe this is kind of derogatory of me, but I love the idea of someone finding like a piece of tin. Oh, cool, piece of tin. Let's see if we can turn it to gold. I think it's kind of a funny image, but anyway, so so
No.
so there's alchemy, turning things to gold, bringing value to something that has no value through magical means. Astrology, same thing. Reading the zodiac. There's a lot of traditions of that. Uh, Catholic leaders, bishops, and popes who would bring the zodiac into the religion, and using the zodiac to tell of Christ's life, and there's even stories of that in early Mormon history. Brigham Young, for example, there's a story about him looking up into the sky. I think it was right before he was introduced to the Book of Mormon. He looks up at the sky and he sees this event happening that he can't explain, and it's sort of a premonition, I guess, that he's about to receive the gospel. And there's other things too, like the star above Bethlehem, looking up, seeing a new unknown star in the heavens, as a harbinger of something new that's about to come. So you have astrology, you have necromancy, which is the idea of talking to someone who's been killed or dead and trying to gain some kind of wisdom there.
I can
So
see
there's a lot of that.
somebody listening to this and thinking to themselves, categorizing each thing you said, and they'll be like, "No, that's not magic. That's miracle." And on the
Mhm.
other hand, "Oh, that's definitely not miracle. That's magic." It sounds like you're putting them all in the same category as supernatural. Is
Mhm.
there when this is, and I know some of these are specific examples, and some of them are just more high level. Lumping these in, do you think that it would be fair for somebody to kind of argue against that, saying you can't lump them together as far as what's coming um, from God and what's coming from um, ungodly sources? Would that be a fair argument to kind of critique you on this?
Um, sure. I mean, someone could make that argument. What I would say though is that the supernatural is an all-encompassing term, especially at this time. For someone, let's say we're living in the 13th century, and the plague is ravaging through our village, and people are dying left and right. They're getting sick. So, and then let's say we do some we do some sort of ritual to invoke the supernatural for help, whether that's using holy water. Let's say we start sprinkling, the priest goes around sprinkling everybody with holy water, and the people who are sprinkled don't die. Okay, so that I would call that supernatural, right? Using supernatural means to accomplish something. But to them back then, yeah, it's supernatural, but it's also not out of the ordinary. Um, someone back then would have said, "Okay, we used holy water. It's got these healing elements to it, and it worked." It would be like us saying, "Okay, we used penicillin on an infection. It worked." You and I, we're not doctors. We may not know how it works. We're not scientists, but we do expect it to work. And so by doing that, it's like, yeah, it's supernatural. We don't understand it, but it did what it was supposed to do. Or let's say we're farmers in the 13th century, same time period. And we want our crops to do well that year. So we pray for rain. Let's say we bury like a magical rod that we found. We find it and we bury it in our field, hoping that it will bring a good crop. And it does. We get a good crop that fall. Again, that it's supernatural, but we expected that to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it brought up a good question that I think I want to bring up once later on. So maybe I'll once we get into the maybe 1800s, more Joseph Smith's time. I'm interested to ask another question regarding what you were just saying, but
you can ask it if you want.
I'll hold on to it till we get there.
Okay. So again, I would say all of these things fall under the supernatural, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that they were unexpected. They did what they were supposed to do. But then you start to see that separation during the Reformation. So up until now, up to this point, about the 1500s, you have the Catholic Church, for lack of a better term, which is very heavy into the supernatural. Even elements of the Mass invoke the supernatural, right? For example, taking the Eucharist. The idea is when you take the wafer, the bread, you take it, you eat it, and it turns into an actual literal piece of Christ's body. That's just one example. Then you get the Reformation and you start to see that sort of separation there. Just one of the many ways that they separate. You have these Reformationists who want to separate themselves from the Catholic Church. And so they start, one of the ways they do that is by distinguishing between the Catholic supernatural tradition and their own supernatural ideas. And so the Reformation starts in 1517. And again, it's a response to Catholic accounts of visions and things like that. At the time, Catholicism had a long tradition of visions of the Virgin Mary and the other saints. And so the Protestants are trying to get away from that, from honoring the Virgin Mary so heavily. And so they start to find other ways of explaining things.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
But they only get away from it partially, right? They still believe in a lot that I would consider non-scientific, or maybe I'll leave it non-scientific, but
well, exactly. And what we see is it's going back to Moses and Pharaoh's court, right? The Reformationists see, okay, what the Catholics are doing, sure, it's supernatural, but it's coming from something else. It's not coming from God. What we're doing, though, is coming from God. You see what I mean?
Okay, so they're really starting to make that distinction more clear that I keep coming back to is it miracle or is it satanic magic? They're saying, all right, this isn't all from God anymore. We're shifting the line where that line exists of what's what in the world of supernatural powers.
Exactly. Yeah, it all supernaturalism, I guess, encompasses all of that, but there's different sources of that supernaturality. I don't know. I'm making up words now. There's different sources of it. And Protestants, just like the Hebrews did thousands of years before, are creating distinctions between those things in order to show that they are right, to reinforce their own beliefs and traditions. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right, Tyler. There's Reformationists didn't dismiss the supernatural elements, the things they can't explain, as coming from, some sort of supernatural source, but they are distinguishing it from the correct source in their own mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So and so they start to look for different ways to explain things, not just saying, "Oh, God created this. What my experience comes from God." their experience comes from Satan, right? They start to find other ways, and that's when we start to see the Enlightenment creep in, and then that creates a further separation. So you have the original church, right? It's just this steady stream. Protestant Reformation comes out. They start to delineate or break away from that stream and create a new stream, and then from there, the Enlightenment takes it in another direction. So you have these different streams now branching off. And the Enlightenment, of course, is all about rationality and finding reasons to explain things that are, in a way, more complicated, but easier to explain, right? So, for example, you have Newton discovering gravity. That's huge. We always think, oh, an apple fell on his head. And so, therefore, he discovered gravity. You realize that the earth has some kind of force that pulls things towards it. Whereas before, then that translates into, okay, the sun then, the gravitational field of the sun is what makes the world rotate around the sun. Whereas before, the Christian belief is that the earth is the exact center of the universe. Everything's rotating around it, right? So, and so you see things that, okay, that makes more sense because I can see it, I can understand it, as opposed to saying there's some invisible person that has an all-powerful force that controls everything. And so from there, miracles and the supernatural take on a more sense of taboo. People who still embrace that sort of thing are seen differently. So we're seeing more distinctions and separations there. And
are we talking
theologian,
like the 1500s at this point, 16th, 17th century?
Right now we're moving into more of the 18th, 16th, 17th and 18th century.
Okay.
Is when the Enlightenment starts to
you mentioned Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah. So we'll get into Jefferson, but yeah, so you start to see these religious people, theologians, leaders, priests start writing things that are like miraculous works, things that can't be explained, are actually from Satan. All the things that we read about in the New Testament ended when the New Testament ends, and the reason for that is because they're concentrated around Jesus, and Jesus doesn't live on the earth anymore, so we can't have these miracles, right? And plus, on top of that, we know why things happen now. We know that crops will do well if we fertilize them, as opposed to praying that they do well or burying a rock in a field and hoping, you know what I mean?
There's
genetics
more the scientific method, if you will. If we have a controlled environment, we try two things, we can learn what impacts things have on results.
Exactly. And the scientific method that starts off with this belief in a divine personage. So, okay, if I don't know, do this, then God will be pleased with me, and it will make it will create the outcome that I want.
Is that real?
And then you have people.
I've never heard that before.
Well, yeah, of course it is. And then people come in and say, no, they see what these people are doing. You created the outcome by, I don't know, I can't think of an example. Like, let's say, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible example. But let's say you're a farmer and you're raising crops. Again, this is a terrible, terrible example. You say, okay, I'm going to fertilize my field because I believe that will incur the favor of God, right? Because he blessed me with these animals. I need to use these animals, their fertilizer, in a good way. I shouldn't be using this example. Okay, and so I got a good crop. Well, then somebody else comes in. Let's say it's their child, So no dad.
How about their deceased cattle or the
Yeah.
first of their
Okay.
flock?
Sure.
Let's stick with
Sure.
sheep.
I don't even know where we're at now.
I just don't want to use our children, please.
So somebody comes in and says, "No, it's not that you pleased a divine being. It's that you did something that made sense, and that created the outcome that you wanted."
Gotcha. But I'm still kind
I'm
of.
sorry.
You mentioned the history of the scientific method, and
Uh-huh.
you said that it began with a controlled experiment, but God is the one creating the. Where does this come from? Are you like? Is that something you researched, or maybe I'm calling you out on it? I've never heard it before, and it's intriguing to me if that's really where it came from.
Yeah, you're calling me out on it. No, I mean, so the scientific method we know of as it is, we consider it just trying things out, right? But you go
In a
back for
controlled experiment, you
yeah,
have a
and that comes out of
hypothesis, and you have one change, and based on changing one thing in that controlled environment, you can determine what the impact is, and fail and
mhm.
either disprove the hypothesis or fail to disprove the hypothesis.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. So that comes out of the Enlightenment, right?
Okay.
This idea that you can do these controlled experiments to get the outcome that you want.
So you're
Well,
saying basically you're saying it doesn't come from a group of atheists who say we're just trying to disprove God. It's coming more from a religious background of people who are trying to figure out how things work.
it's just people trying to figure out the way things work. But
Okay,
when the
I can go with
scientific,
that.
yeah, when the scientific, what is it called? Scientific uh, process comes around, it has evolved from, okay, let's see what we can do to make God happy to get the outcome that we want, to, okay, let's try to engineer this action in a way that gets the outcome that we want.
Okay.
So the scientific method, that's the word, has been around for centuries, millennia. It's just taken on different forms. You know what I mean? It's just taken on, it just falls under a different umbrella. It goes from a divine umbrella to a natural umbrella.
You've regained my trust, John. You had me for a minute.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I guess that
Keeping.
was really bad. The last 10 minutes have been terrible.
All right.
So,
Let's do a quick time check then, because I was hoping to kind of wrap up this. Well, I don't know if we'll have a chance to wrap this up. What are your thoughts? Can we? Is there? We have some left in Magic, but do we want to kind of rush through it, hit the important things? Do we want to stick around a little later and finish it up, or do you think we can drag this to a third
so
episode?
I think we could take it to a third episode. I'd like to do, and I'm sorry that we didn't do this today, but I'd like to take it to more of a focused episode on Magic World in Mormonism at this time.
Okay.
This whole episode was about bringing us up to date. And I'll just say that from the Reformation, you get people separating from this idea of visions. You get the separation of the supernatural into a good supernatural and a bad supernatural. And you move into the Enlightenment, which is about science. And then into early American times, you still see that the Enlightenment is around, especially among mostly wealthy urbanites, though not completely. And rural people in rural America, like the Smith family, are more inclined to believe in what is now termed the supernatural as opposed to science, right? So the culture that the Smiths live in is more inclined to believe that an angel appeared to a young boy and told him about a golden Bible.
Okay.
So in Joseph Smith's, when he tells people the story that an angel appeared to him, yeah, there would have been a response of this kid is crazy because that doesn't happen anymore. But there also would have been a response that, oh, this kid has a real gift. I don't necessarily believe that he's, called of God, but a spirit has appeared to him and he knows where gold is. Let's get him to show us where it is and we can all become rich. And then the third response would be, okay, yeah, this kid has been called of God, and he's going to, restore the ancient religion of Christ.
Sometimes that makes me wonder where I am on that spectrum.
So yeah. Anyway, I hope that brings us up to speed. The point of all of it.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask: is there anything else we need to cover until we get to that 1800s Joseph Smith's time? I know we've gone way back in history, just to kind of see how magic has been interpreted across the Western culture for thousands of years. And we're right up to Joseph Smith's time. Is there anything we need to know leading into that to prepare us for next time?
Just the whole point of this is to say that Joseph Smith's stories would not have been considered that out of the ordinary.
Okay.
And all of the persecution that we read about isn't because they considered him crazy. It's because they didn't necessarily understand what his intentions were. Okay, so next week we'll get into more contemporary examples of magic and treasure digging, divination, seer stones, that sort of thing, around the time of Joseph Smith.
Cool. No, I like that. I think we've done a good job covering that. This is we talk about this, and sometimes it's tough to not put my perspective on this, but all these magical things you've discussed going over the centuries, if not millennia, are normal. It's what people expect real life to be. Just like a member of the church would pray and expect to have God answer their prayers, these people would expect the same result in doing whatever these rituals or practices are for that culture. And it's granted, I don't know what everyone would think about that comparison, but I think it's fair to say that they're not seen as, it looks different when you're on the inside doing it versus when you're looking at it in the past from our viewpoint, saying, oh, we know that turning, like you say, turning tin into gold, we know it's still worthless metal. You might have changed the appearance of it, but you're not actually doing anything. For them, that's not true. For them, they're actually making it more valuable. There's an actual science that's not the science we live by, an actual physics that's not the physics that we learn in high school. This is their reality, and it's a supernatural reality, but it's their reality nonetheless. And we see this over and over and over and over again across every culture. And now you've led us right up to Joseph Smith's time, where this is the normal. It might be supernatural, but it's not. These people don't have the physics classes, the chemistry classes, the science classes to even compare it to. We can compare it at least to our formal educations and see what follows our scientific understanding versus our theological or philosophical understanding. They didn't even have that comparison throughout this whole history that you gave. So I think you've done a great job explaining that, and it's been helpful. And I'm excited to hear more about kind of what's going on in Joseph Smith's time. And that question I had, I'm not going to forget it. I will bring it up because it's more relevant to what's going on in the magical world around Joseph Smith and what might he have done. I'll probably even ask it to you beforehand so you can be prepared, because I know for some people it's extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. shoot it over. And yeah, that's again, we've talked about this. That's one of the goals of this podcast is to help us all understand that history is it's an alien world, right? It's not just a different culture and a different time. It's a different language. It's a different way of viewing everything. And the historian, we are just trying to put the pieces of a puzzle together without the picture. So
Right.
hopefully we have a better, our listeners and ourselves, we have a better idea of what life was like during
Yeah.
these times.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John. I think as far as content, that's all we had. I did want to surprise, well, not surprise you, but I haven't talked to you about this yet. Are just a little bit of housekeeping. So if you don't care about housekeeping, feel free to just give up and miss out on that awesome song at the end. But our numbers have been growing continually. We've been pretty successful, kind of getting people to listen, and really, I think retaining has been pretty high. I would say it's sometimes very difficult. I don't know who the returning listeners are, who's listening for the first time, but people that at least reach out to us, we definitely get lots of positive feedback, and those who don't like it are less likely to reach out. However,
that might change after today's episode, but yeah, hopefully not.
Maybe that brings me to my however. No, however, as great as our growth has been, particularly in the podcast world, on as well as our YouTube viewership, our live listening is not growing so much. In fact, I think it's kind of declined throughout. And so my question for you, John, and I'm doing this over the episode just because I do want to hear back to listeners as well. Please email me or reach out to me, however you know. If is live streaming this important, it certainly would be easier to just do it when we're both available and not have a routine time that we need to meet. But John, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm good with whatever. The nice thing about doing it live is that we get we can have interaction with our listeners. But we could also do that not live. We could have people submit questions throughout the week, and then we can answer them in the show, and that would be fun too. So I'm anxious to hear what our listeners say, what they would prefer.
Okay.
And we may not hear it for another week or so what they wanted to do, but that's
based
okay.
on the listening patterns. No, how
Yeah.
about for right now? Then I think let's plan on not going live next week just to try it out. Like
Okay.
if we hear back from somebody who does want to ask a question or they want to tune in, then we will definitely go back on. We can definitely go back and we'll keep you posted on Instagram. Follow us on Instagram. Subscribe to us on YouTube. But if there's really radio silence, then people I have talked to, at least the ones I've talked to, they're more interested in just listening when they're available. And
Yeah.
I haven't heard many who are like, oh, I make sure I'm there every week. That could change.
Mhm.
I'm open to doing it, but it also makes it quite a bit easier just to record it and then post it without worrying about the complexity of live streams. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm good either way.
Well, give us feedback then. Let me hear what you think. If you made it to the end of this episode, you deserve to have your voice heard. Not because it was a bad episode, but because. All right. No, I just did it. No. Anyway, is there anything else we have?
Nope. If you have questions, email Tyler at.
It's all on me. It's all on me.
I'm trying to think of a hilarious email that people could reach you at. But most of them, never mind. I won't get into it. Yeah, if you have questions, definitely let us know. Love to answer them. And thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah, just a plug in there. If you haven't yet, log in, subscribe, YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and that way you'll we'll be able to keep in touch, and also help us know kind of who's listening and give us a little bit of encouragement to know that we're making a difference out there. It's tough to talk into a empty audience sometimes. Knowing that they do listen, but at the same time not getting any reaction can sometimes be difficult.
And leave us a nice review.
Yeah,
wherever
5
fine
stars.
podcasts are sold. 5 stars only. Yeah.
Five stars or bust. All right. Well, thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler.
We'll talk to you next week. Bye.